Everything can benefit from virtual production because of control. Let's talk about the financial side of things. You're going to benefit. You're not having to worry about rotoscoping, keying. Compositing is generally being done in camera.
Hello, you're watching and listening to the voice of virtual production, an exclusive series by Synapse and Little Black Book. Across the episodes of this video interview series, we'll hear from industry-leading experts about how the world of production's transforming and discover how to get the most out of cutting-edge virtual production tech. My name is Adam Bennett. I'm a writer at Little Black Book. Today, I'm joined by two perfect guests to discuss both the art and the business of virtual production. Justin Diener is the CEO of Synapse Virtual Production. His resume includes producing feature films, the most recent being Jennifer Lopez's This Is Me Now, as well as award-winning music videos and branded content. Justin, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for the intro.
And what a sparkly backdrop we've got there. Where are you coming from?
It's beautiful, isn't it? I'm in the Opera House today.
Wow. The budget knows no bounds for a voice in virtual production.
Well, virtual production makes it all so easy. How could I resist?
And alongside Justin, I'm excited to say that we're joined by Andrew Fowler. Andrew is an Emmy-winning producer who's held senior roles at Disney, New Regency Productions and Netflix, where he's worked on titles like Revenant and Tron Legacy. Thanks for joining us, Andrew. How are you doing?
Fantastic, thank you. I'm not in the Opera House, unfortunately, but Westlake Village will have to do.
Yeah, no, your backdrop looks really grey, really.
Really?
Yeah. Well, yeah, thank you both very much for joining us. And I was hoping to start by asking about one of the most common issues people are talking about in the worlds of entertainment and production today, which is the sheer demand for content. It's never been greater, and it's showing no signs of slowing down. So how's virtual production going to help us meet that demand?
I think that virtual production allows us to achieve higher levels of content creation and is also a tool for creators of all different types. I think what we've seen emerging in the marketplace over the last several years is a demand for diverse types of content. It's not the same that it used to be, where we could count on box office films to drive large crowds. Just through the different distribution methods, whether that be TikTok, YouTube, the streamers, the box office, you name it, we're seeing things change pretty dramatically in the space. What virtual production can allow is for new means of filmmaking for any type of creative. It gives us an opportunity to access locations that maybe weren't available on traditional production pipelines. It allows directors to be able to realize the scope and scale of the productions that they're trying to create. You'll hear it frequently, and I think the jury is still out, but budget considerations are also taken with virtual production. If the project is needing to find a reduction in what would historically be found through visual effects, there's a very large argument with compelling data supporting that we're now able to create very large-scale, high-concept productions without the timelines, without the budget associated with a traditional visual effect workflow. And it's a more effective workflow, one that creates an environment, an ecosystem for writers, directors, producers, executives, artists, performers, you name it, to see a better caliber of deliverable, whereas previously they were frequently needing to wait on a process using green screen or blue screen, which has iffy results, certainly without the budget.
Yeah, absolutely, Justin. I agree. I think, and interestingly, there's been, with the increase in content, there's also been an increase in, I guess, the ability of virtual production to help fill some of, the curve there, because, the industry's grown a lot over the last number of years when it comes to virtual production as a whole. And, I think the early days, it was very, very difficult. The technology was at its, early days, and of course the talent as well around it, whether it's in front of or behind camera, not necessarily always as was well versed in how to get the best from it. So I think there's been a huge improvement over the last few years, actually, as a result of, people sort of getting in there, working hard, pushing hard early, and sort of discovering maybe where some of the gaps were. And so I think, when you ask the question about, obviously there's an increase in content globally. Certainly virtual production was one of those opportunities that I saw when I was at Netflix to sort of to offer an advantage, when it came to production timelines or VFX timelines, or, just to sort of ask the question, is there another way of doing things than traditional filmmaking? And it just so proved that, for the right set of circumstances, the right project, et cetera, and the right filmmakers and showrunners, et cetera, there was definitely advantage, and it could bring efficiency, as Justin's pointing out, both in terms of your, shooting schedules, therefore you can effectively do more, in a shorter amount of time. And so if you are talking about scale, then obviously doing more in a shorter amount of time is always a good thing.
Yeah. But Andrew, I feel like a lot of the stuff that came out of Netflix during your time there, like 1899 or Stranger Things, looked fantastic. So how, as we talk about scaling up content production and efficiencies, how are we ensuring that we safeguard quality and craft as well?
Yeah, I come from a production background, really, and myself back in the day. And so, I guess the context setting a little bit there for me is, when I first started at Netflix, I was doing the same amount of VFX shots. So I was looking at the same amount of VFX work as I was in 1 year at Disney, right, for example. So 7,000 shots in 1 week as opposed to 1 year, right? And so, when you think about, you talk about quality, it was very, very important. But quality at scale is something else, right? So, you want to make sure, I always think of it as appropriate quality, because not everything is always going to be A1+. Mm-hmm. It's about finding the right quality, the right fit for the show. And that's what I loved about sort of the opportunity of virtual production back in the early days. And let's be clear, there's obviously virtual production is a very broad topic, right? I think to some degree, because Justin's sitting in front of the Opera House right there, which isn't really, of course, it's virtual production. We're talking a little bit about LED volume to some degree today, I think. But, ultimately it's a much broader subject matter than just that. But in that vein, anything, where you can improve quality at less cost, as we talk about, right? And something that I looked at, and we all looked at early on, it's no secret, is how do we make like car shots look better, for example? Mm-hmm. How do we get sort of effectively process work just looking so much better than it generally does out of the box, say in VFX? Sometimes the keying isn't great, the tracking isn't great, there's a whole host of things, the lighting isn't great. So that was an early sort of like target. And that's amazing how many shots in a show or across, say, many, many shows at Netflix had that type of content. I mean, many, many thousands of shots over a year, right, could now be thought of being done differently. So for me, it was about, pulling those levers to see, where those opportunities existed, not just maybe in the process work, and raising the quality of that type of, VFX, blue screen, green screen shot, but also across the board. And that's where the shot at 1899 was for us a really great opportunity and for us to prove that it could go beyond just that.
And Andy, I want to add to that too, because I think that you touched on something, and Adam, to your question about quality control, what's really exciting right now is it feels like we're almost at a gold rush moment with the industry. We're seeing much wider adoption of the technology, and I'll speak to the LED side of it because that, as Andy mentioned, I'm here on a volume. Synapse is focused on the LED component as well as a lot of different categories of work. But speaking of virtual production within a volume, we're seeing departments within the studios that now are focused on virtual production. We're seeing ad agencies and production companies receiving RFPs that specifically ask for virtual production. We're seeing directors with very, very high interest in learning more about what can be achieved within virtual production. All of this amounts to a higher demand. And with a higher demand, we're able to further educate our different crews, technicians. Education's a major component of all of this. And as more people are beginning to learn about the techniques to be able to deliver high quality shots, understand the pipeline and workflows to really create effective content, we're only going to continue to push that bar. I think the challenge is, and Andy, correct me if I'm wrong, but the challenge is that I think you probably faced as a trailblazer in the industry is when you're doing something for the first time, when you're really on the front lines of innovation, you don't have the history of experience with a lot of different groups that have been doing it for 2, 5. The technology hasn't even really been around for more than 5 or 6 years, right? So as more and more people are becoming familiar with it, as the interest in it increases, we're only going to see more stability with the quality within the industry.
One of the earliest challenges we had was just education, was just the understanding, not just, I mean, obviously those technicians, when we put up the volume itself, it was cool. It's fine. We had a sort of semblance of understanding of its limitations and where it was appropriate, right? But I'm actually got to remember COVID hit as well, when we just got this thing up and running. I guess you might say in some level of competency, and of course it became an answer to a lot of challenges at that time. Travel. Just generally speaking, that was one of the biggest things, just going out on vacation. So one thing I noticed early on was that sudden explosion, and it was a concern because education was lacking. First things first, of course, is having access to the technology and then iterating and learning from it. And then the second thing you would hope is to have some kind of controlled progression of the technology through the industry fairly organically. And actually that didn't happen. It happened a little bit sort of as an explosion because of COVID. And we were very fortunate with 1899 to find a fantastic filmmaker and a fantastic set of partners from a technology standpoint as well to make it happen and work well. But as I was looking around, I could see, those that weren't necessarily as educated in the technology and how to use the technology in front of behind camera, making all sorts of mistakes. And they were honest ones, because it was all so new. But education often comes from experience. And it was certainly the case for those early few years. And of course, when I looked at my friends over in the sort of Lucasfilm space, with Colin Wilson doing such amazing work there, it was always a little bit on their coattails once we got up and running and understanding where some of those limitations were. But education is key. And what I love about what Synapse is doing, and Justin and the team are doing, is they really are, I think, one of the first groups that are sort of leveraging technology, with a production mindset. And it's surprising how you often have people sort of leaning into it without that production mindset, that come at it maybe just from pure VFX mindset or some other sort of some other craft. But it really is production first, virtual production first. It should be production virtual, because for me, it's always number one is how do we use this as part of our sort of pipeline for film production. And one of the early, I guess, lessons learned is that sometimes that wasn't always the case. So education is critical, and I'm glad that someone like Justin and the team at Synapse is sort of at the forefront of that conversation.
Justin, can I pick up on something you said earlier as well? You mentioned that people are coming to you and asking specifically for virtual production. When did that start happening? How long has that been the case?
Well, Synapse started about 1.5 years ago, and we were essentially homeless when we first broke into the industry. We didn't have our own volume. We were fortunate in that our founders all come from a background of filmmakers, and we decided to frame the company as a filmmaker-first company. Chris Propst, an award-winning ASC, Rich Lee, an award-winning director, Aaron Gordon coming from advertising and marketing, Jeff Knight was the director of production at Madison Square Garden Sphere, and Duke, our CRO, spent 17 years in visual effects. As you mentioned, my background is in production. So we're able to create this overlapping Venn diagram of all of these different types of trainings and disciplines that are able to service the industry. And the way that we wanted to shape our company offering was that we would be a support system for those that were looking to break into it and understand it. And through the process of being able to work with other studios, different production companies, directors, cinematographers, directors of photography, if you will, we were able to start to really instill that company ethos within the industry because we've been working with these counterparts, with these partners, with these friends and peers for over 10, in some cases 20 years at different capacities from our previous positions. We were getting more and more recognition as not just a studio, not just a company that can create VAD, not only being able to provide consulting services, but really a full suite, a streamlined, vertically integrated group. So when we opened our doors to the public here at our Synapse studio at Los Angeles Center Studios, and it was pretty quick to start receiving calls, and more people are understanding that value add of not just coming in, turning on the wall, and here you go, you're able to shoot, this is what it does, good luck, but really becoming a partner in the entire process, working with the bidding producers, heads of production, executive producers, while they're pitching, helping to break down scripts, understand the boards, work with production designers, directors, cinematographers to really figure out what their plan was going to be. We need to make sure that every shoot that happens here and every virtual production shoot that happens anywhere is a success. We're firm believers of a rising tide raises all the ships, and that's part of our company goal, not just here, but within the industry. So whatever we can do, going back to education, to help not only our clients that are coming through have a successful production, but really help to educate the public, working with companies or groups like the ASC, VES, DGA, just to name a few, as well as colleges and higher education institutions, to understand what the capabilities and the shortcomings of this technology are, and help get them to adopt an understanding of what's possible, what it looks like, how to achieve it. Those are all part of what we're doing here at Synapse, and I think that that's part of what has created a pretty meteoric interest within the company. And
Andrew, speaking of what's possible and what's not, if we think back to when you first started to think about these technologies, sort of 2016-ish time maybe?
Yeah,
ish. Can you share any examples of something that might be possible now that wasn't possible then? Like, how far have we come?
You know, obviously the volume, the walls themselves, the panels themselves have got progressively just better and better, you know, just in terms of image quality and light rendition, etc. So, you know, and there's talk of, you know, 4 LEDs, you know, potentially, you know, with different sort of, I guess, sort of slightly different gamut there. So that's going to be interesting. But generally speaking, I'd say, you know, even though, you know, there's been some steady progression, I think where the biggest, I guess, advantage has become is just, again, comes back the understanding. The most interesting, I guess, advancement over the last couple of years is that there's a competency and understanding, right? One of the aha moments I had on, say, 1899 over one or two others was just thinking outside of the box when it came to sort of production design. And Justin talked about sort of the importance of obviously working with HODs there and production designs, DPs, etc. But, you know, critically, you know, a well-planned production with a production designer became, I guess, the number one, I guess, driver towards success for us at Netflix and certain other productions I've seen. Having that sort of understanding of, you know, where is the line, you know, working very closely with the VFX supervisor and the DP, of course. But, you know, we sort of ended up finding a turntable situation at times, depending on a production, ended up being really useful. So you could obviously turn your whole set into the wall as opposed to having to sort of keep moving things around, and sort of little sort of learnings that you find, you know. Actually, interestingly, some of the most successful environments are those that are supposed to look photo-real rather than purely science fiction, because, you know, you can then blend the worlds between the two. You can blend, you know, works well in Z because you have that sort of blending sort of a zone, if you like, where the worlds connect. So for me, it's more about the learning has come through execution, understanding physically, you know, what's working, not working. Obviously, a little bit of that is the technology, of course, without a doubt. But a lot of it is the understanding of the teams around it and how best leverage it.
Okay, so this is one for both of you. Are there any specific types of projects where you're finding technology like this is having the biggest impact, or is it completely universal? It can help any project.
It really depends on what metric you're using for benefit, right? So there's going to be the aesthetic or just the quality of image. There's going to be financial implications. There's going to be ease of use. I think one that transcends all of that and is probably one of the most sought after benefits is the idea of control, right? Like working on film production, your best friend is being able to control what's generally pretty uncontrollable. You're dealing with hundreds of people and weather and locations and permits and creative and changes and you name it. So I think that every project can benefit from virtual production because you're coming into a controlled setting. You're going through a development process that really allows all the stakeholders involved to understand what it is that they're walking into. You don't need to worry about where the sun is going to be that day or what time sunset is or if it's going to rain or if wind is going to pick up or all of a sudden a tree got cut down or any of the other things that we face with production. So general disclaimer is that everything can benefit from virtual production because of control, in my opinion. I think looking at some of these other things that producers might be interested in, let's talk about the financial side of things. You're going to benefit from a project with a lot of visual effects, green screen, blue screen, using virtual production instead of that. You're not having to count shots. You're not having to worry about rotoscoping, keying. Compositing is generally being done in camera. And again, I should make another caveat in that I'm not saying that this is the answer to replace all green or blue screen, because it's not. There's a lot of different reasons why you would still want to use them. But if you're applying it for the right projects, you are going to be able to find a massive reduction in time in the human resources that you need to put at it, the amount of control that you have, and that control is even applicable to changes within it without having to go way back into the pipeline. And that's all through what the capabilities of Epic's Unreal Engine are, and having a real-time rendering system that allows so much flexibility within the environments that are going up on the wall. Now, to that same point, and to pick up on one of the other categories of benefit, when you're talking about creative control and aesthetic, to be able to be in an environment where you're getting emissive light that comes down, you're able to capture reflections, you're not having to cheat the images that are being captured in camera, that's a game changer. And I think that as long as the environments are properly prepared, everybody's on the same page, you're prepping the studio correctly with production design, with your photography, with your blocking, and the performers are engaged, which typically they are because they see the environments that they're working in, you're really going to get a much better result than you would by shooting in a huge cove of green screen for weeks at a time. And I think that there's plenty of reports on previous actors' experiences and directors' experiences, cinematographers' experiences that can validate that claim.
Interestingly, in the last, I guess, year or so, can't mention names as such, but I was involved in sort of breaking down a fairly large production with an opportunity of saying how will we use virtual production instead of more traditional production methods. And I went to London and sort of went around the stages, etc. One thing I was really struck by was how many dark days there were on the stages, right? And for me that was an opportunity right there, right? The VFX, there's definitely advantage for sure, depending on the sequence, depending on the blocking and et cetera. And there's often quite a big advantage, right? But it's to some degree, you might say cost of the ball, obviously, there's things that offset. But when you look at many stages that are sitting there doing nothing, waiting for a director to finish a block or to come in from, somewhere else, and they might be sitting there for a bunch of weeks. You think, well, that doesn't really make sense when I know, right? Say, for example, I'm just going to dig into sort of 1899 again just for now, because it's a good example. We could turn around, or the production could turn around, that stage in literally as a kit of parts in hours, right? Now, if you had, one of my sort of suggestions on this other production was, if you could have a smaller stage or, LED stage. In fact, you have two, you can bounce between them. You could actually get rid of a lot of those dark stages depending on what's on them, right? Because, again, going back to 1897 and others, where, if you have a vastly digital extension effectively and you're shooting, on a sort of fairly limited set, that extension can have any scope. And that's the other advantage, right? The production designer, which is why, those production designers that sort of look in through the door and actually begins to, the light bulbs go off, they can see they're not being limited by a physical build where they would have been, traditionally. Again, an example, there's a sequence in 1899, we have a ballroom sequence, on the boat, if you've ever seen it. Most of that, like only a third of that is real. 2/3 is all obviously LED volume with digi-doubles sitting at tables, et cetera. Now, that set to have built that sort of glass ceiling and all that other stuff would have cost many, many hundreds of thousands, but it was done for less than 100,000, obviously, in VFX and then projected on the LED volume. So you end up getting more scope, for one thing, a much more visually impressive scene and sequence for a fraction of the budget in one stage, that you could then turn around very quickly between setups and even between sort of locations. And that was something to, obviously from a production standpoint for the right show, you have distant locations and you can try and bring that into a stage. You have the control that Justin talks about, but you don't have the, the distant travel for the whole crew. You can sort of have more of a base camp sort of mentality. And becomes very, very efficient on actually very big shows, depending on what they are, and if you have the right mindset going in by production design, and obviously the DPs.
I'm going to double down on the location part of that as well, because it's not only for very large shows that you find that benefit. We do a lot of advertising work here, and what advertisers are finding, what the agencies and production companies are wrestling with is budgets have come down. The appetite for scope and scale is still rising. And so the problem that we're often trying to solve is, how are we able to execute a script that might only have 2-3 days of shooting, but there's 4 or 6 different locations? While virtual production, you're able to go from a home interior to a skyrise roof to a courtyard to a snow scene to a beach, you name it. You can be anywhere in the world, whether that's through captures of HDR or Unreal that you're creating, or other multitude of ways of generating or acquiring these backgrounds. You can switch between them in less than 5 minutes. And so that's massive. That's a huge opportunity for everybody to benefit from. Now we're able to create really compelling content that has quality, and that not only the audience, but those that are writing it, those that are producing it, directing in it, everybody's benefiting from that. And I think that I'm going off subject, but it is important to mention it when we talk about reducing the amount that we're building something or the people that are involved. Our hope, our goal, and our mission here isn't to eliminate jobs, right? Because that's something that's synonymous with not only virtual production, but AI. I think that if we're able to leverage this technology to create this high concept, compelling, impactful, soulful, and engaging content, whether that be in a music video, a commercial, a feature film, a live event, you name it, there's going to continue to be a higher and higher demand for it, and we're going to be able to create a larger volume of work that keeps people working and more people hired within this industry.
On to that point, do you think that these technologies are changing how producers learn the ropes? Like, are there any skills that are going to be really important for young producers coming into the industry now that maybe weren't so relevant even just a few years ago?
Yeah, certainly. So that's why, again, we come back to the education side of things, or the exposure to, right? When you look at some of the filmmakers on Mandalorian, for example, who are have become very adept at leveraging sort of virtual production tools in previs and taking that through to on set, just became part of, it was their language, right? They understood it because they came through a curriculum, you might say, whether that was, in sort of education or actually some limited experience earlier on. But that is now obviously much more prevalent within industry. And so as a result of that, you find that a lot of young producers VFX producers, production designers, DPs, etc. They're becoming more sort of used to getting used to using this technology because it's just part of their everyday. And that's the big difference that, as I said, mentioned earlier, that I've noticed over the last few years. It's become part of the everyday for a lot of filmmakers. And there was an interesting, sort of dialogue recently, I think at the AI on the Lot we had with Catherine there, and she was mentioning that, she's now doing a lot more herself through AI, initially just to visualize things and understand things in a different way than she would have done before, as a creative technologist, whether that's with a production mindset, but also with a creative mindset. And that is a new breed, if you like, right? It's someone that has the ability to sort of left brain, right brain. And so, I think sort of producers in the future have to have don't have to, but, I think if you want to prove to be successful moving forward, you have to be a little bit more open-minded towards doing things a little bit differently. And that, I think, is extremely positive, and I'm seeing a lot of that now.
Yeah, and I think the beautiful thing about this technology is that we're not completely changing the core of filmmaking. It's the same, it's based on all the same foundational elements. You have story, you have performance, you have coverage, lighting, production design. We're not getting rid of any departments here. We're only adding a couple more. And again, with a larger market adoption to it, there's more and more support that are able to help a producer through the process of understanding what's next. And I think it's our responsibility, being in those departments, to make sure that they're armed with the information that's necessary for them to have a successful shoot. The other thing that I would say about it is that the threshold for understanding these new workflows, schedules, pipelines is not one that limits you from learning. It's a process that will come naturally to most. I think a perfect example is here at Synapse, our head of production, Elisa Cheeves, was a woman that we had the privilege of bringing in, formerly with Viacom. She didn't really know anything about virtual production on day one. And within a matter of months, she has become an absolute surgeon. She understands down to the finest detail, the entire process, how it works. And I think that it goes to show that if you are interested in the technology and how it can apply to whatever different type of content you're looking to create, you too are able to gain this understanding and become very excited about it in a relatively short period of time.
That's really interesting. So we feel that the tech is intuitive enough that a producer with imagination or open-mindedness, as you said, Andrew, can find a good way to use it no matter how much experience.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I think we've both been saying it, right? Just having the curiosity, right, I guess, is certainly going to be vital for anyone to succeed, in this space. You have to have an interest, number one, be curious, and not afraid, and sort of, just embrace it. And I know there's a lot of people that, have that mindset who are succeeding well because, look, a lot of people are very, very new to this. It isn't necessarily completely starting from zero because depending on your skill set, you might be coming in with a bit of understanding of certain parts of the technology. But, when you step back and look at the results of, what it is to make a production using these types of techniques without any volume, et cetera, people, regardless of age, regardless of background, are kind of like starting a little bit more of an even playing field to some degree. I mean, yes, you have those in coming out of, in education, but it might form part of the curriculum that actually is obviously an added advantage. But generally speaking, a lot of people are starting, with a much lesser delta, if you like, of experience, which I think is really cool.
And the good news is that it's exciting. Like, this is pretty amazing what we're able to do. It's an absolute catalyst for creativity, and that we're seeing a solution for bumping into administrative or producerial types of issues as well. And just about everybody that's walked through this store, whether they come in with their doubts about the technology or they're generally excited and enthusiastic to learn more about it from the go, leave with their jaw on the floor, their eyes open, and true excitement about what they can come back here and shoot, what sort of abilities with the production process it's going to unlock for them. So it's motivating for me to see. I think it's motivating for all of the team. And I would urge anybody that has even the slightest interest in it to look into it a little bit further, because it will spark a new level of innovation and storytelling within them as well.
And, to close out our conversation today, I wanted to attempt to look into a crystal ball a little bit. I wanted to ask you both, if we were to have this same conversation, the three of us, in a year's time, what do you think we'd be talking about?
Pressure. Wow. Just to hopefully reflect.
Yeah, we are going to bookmark this, by the way. We're going to come back to this in a year's time.
Okay. I think, so the short answer is just greater adoption, right? Greater understanding, kind of everything we've been talking about through experience for education. Is there going to be improvements in the technology? Of course, there will be, in terms of the LED volume, or the screens themselves, etc. So yes, there's always going to be an advancement of the technology, but I just think there's going to be just more adoption just by virtue of the fact that more people will be used to using it. So in a year from now, I expect to see it much more as part of the conversation in a lot more productions as line producers, right? Number one, right? As well, line producers have a little bit more of an understanding, are less fearful, and that also departments start to get used to speaking to each other more in this type of conversation, because virtual production or LED volume, for example, in that space, is something that needs conversation with every group, like, from, let's say, VFX, production and design, camera, etc., obviously, and the filmmakers themselves. So that's something that has happened as freely as it should today, and that's just going to improve and become more of a common thing. And therefore, in a year from now, it'll just be more stuff happening, more part of the day-to-day of a production, because it's just more accepted and more understood.
Yeah, I completely agree with Andy that we're going to see a much wider adoption and become more prevalent within a filmmaker's toolkit. Like, using everybody's favorite buzzword, AI integration into the pipeline is going to be a big part of it. What we see, the tools that are emerging with AI and their application specific to virtual production, is not to be overlooked or underestimated. I just had the privilege of sitting with Andy at AI on the Lot, which we hosted here at Synapse, talking about the integration of AI into virtual production pipeline, and not only within the volume here, but the ways that we're going to be able to apply the science, techniques, and technologies behind virtual production as a whole. Also, I think that we're going to see some of that emerging as well and integrated into the different software. Unreal is already doing it. I can go down a long list of a bunch of other companies, software, and developers that are creating some really incredible tools not to be ignored. Last and not least, where we're going to be in a year is, I think, a larger focus and appreciation for the technology and education of it itself. I think that more territories are going to be investing in volumes. I believe that we're going to see more campuses, sound studios, lots, however you want to refer to them, making sure that the LED side of the technology is part of what they offer all the different filmmaking groups that come through.
I have one thing, and just to actually agree with Justin on I guess one of the sort of barriers to entry, if you like, as a sort of producery person, when it comes to the costing of all of this stuff, is how much does it cost me to get an environment onto the wall, right? And one of the biggest, I think, sort of advancements we're going to see over the next year is the democratization, if you like, of environments, etc., that you get onto a wall, obviously in more cheap and more efficiently, cleaner. And so I guess, when I'm talking about no big advancements, I'm just saying, I think the hardware to some degree, yes, there might be some improvement here and there, but I think, the biggest advancement is going to come through, ray tracing, removing rasterization effectively, the AI sort of doing a fantastic job. Some of the work that's being done at Chaos Innovation Lab, for example, I think is really intriguing. So, I think, nerfs, Gaussian spats, all that sort of stuff, does it make that onto the environment and onto the wall? Of course, there's all that sort of work being done. So for me, that's what I'm excited about over the next year. that's the biggie for me. I think that's where you'll see the biggest change, not just in terms of production and understanding, but on how you get that material onto the volume.
And I think the last thing that we will see more of is the involvement of proper virtual production departments, the way that crews are set up, the producers that we're speaking with, the studios that we're speaking with. We're going to see a lot more reshoots happening in virtual production volumes versus flying everybody back to location, having to do hold and folds on different sets, rebuilding things, you name it. Knowing that reshoots are part of the way that we make films today, and that there's additional photography as well, are really going to drive interest in making sure, the same way that there's a visual effects supervisor on every major feature film, we're going to be seeing a virtual production supervisor as well, making sure that all the environments are being scanned, captured, acquisition of assets, ensuring that there are everything is in place to be able to go back with your talent after you edit, after you realize, okay, we have 5 or another 10 days. How much of that, what scenes are we going to be able to pick up? It's tough to argue with the fact that you will be able to get more days, more location, more coverage, and more bang for your buck, being able to do the majority of those reshoots in a controlled environment like an LED volume versus figuring out how to bounce all over the state or the globe, what have you.
It's going to be a lot happening in that 1 year.
It's going to be fun.
Unfortunately, we are running up to the end of the time we have allotted for today. So much so that all that remains for me to do is say thank you very much to our guests today, Justin and Andrew. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
And for more industry-leading insights into virtual production, stay tuned to The Voice of Virtual Production, brought to you by Synapse. I'll see you next time.
If they understand the tools, they understand how to maximize them. Instead of thinking about it from, hey, we had to close off this insane canyon area to get this incredible shot, it's, hey, we can be in that canyon any spot, any day, any time we want to for every future campaign, and that could be something that's a recurring thing if we decide to. As the space grows, you'll get a lot of people who are using it pretty good. You know, our goal, especially at Synapse, is to make sure people are using it brilliantly.